Hello, fourth grade readers and writers. Just a reminder, I'm your virtual teacher, Mrs. Ewing, and welcome to ELA School Away from School. All right, we are on week 4, so we've been doing a lot of work around ratifying the 19th Amendment and the United States response to inequality. And so last week we started to read more about women who really played a key role in that ratifying of the 19th Amendment and women getting the right to vote. But one of the things we're going to talk about, and we're going to review our guiding questions, but we talked about how the 19th Amendment, or ratifying the 19th Amendment, really spurred and inspired other movements. And we also saw how even after women got the right to vote, there was still inequality in the United States. So we are actually going to explore that more and see another movement that came after ratifying the 19th Amendment, but was inspired by that work. So before we get started, just a reminder, this is lesson 15, and let's look at our guiding questions. What can we learn from the process of ratifying the 19th Amendment? How can stories inspire us to take action to contribute to a better world? How and why can we encourage and support others to contribute to a better world? Before we get started though, we need our materials. So you're going to get your new text this week. It's titled The Many Black Women Who Helped to Build the Civil Rights Movement. You're going to need your lesson 15 lesson planner and your lesson 15 note catcher. Just a reminder, all those materials you're going to be able to find in that ELA packet, and then you're going to need a sharpened pencil. So pause this video and go ahead and collect your materials. All right, now that we have our materials, let's get started. Let's look at our learning target. I can determine the main idea of a text and find supporting details. So today we're once again going to work with finding the main idea and supporting details, but you're going to notice we're going to ask the question of what the main idea is in a little bit of a different way, but we're still working to find that main idea and the supporting details that support that main idea. All right, so let's go ahead and start reading. So I'm going to read it today. Just a reminder, as you move on in the other days in the lessons that are working with this text, come back to lesson 15 and you can watch me read it again. After I read this, if you need to hear it again with a family member, a caregiver, or a friend, go ahead and read this text. All right, so our text, the title is The Many Black Women Who Helped to Build the Civil Rights Movement. If you need to, pause this video and go ahead and find that text so you can read along with me. All right, find that text. My text is over here. All right, great. So the title, The Many Black Women Who Helped to Build the Civil Rights Movement. And then we see a picture here. Under that picture, it's going to give us some clues to what we're looking at. It says, Image 1, Coretta Scott King, an American civil rights campaigner and widow of Martin Luther King Jr., stands behind a podium covered in microphones at a rally for peace in Vietnam at Central Park in New York City, April 27, 1968. All right, let's go ahead and start reading this article. On August 28, 1963, hundreds of thousands of protesters gathered in Washington, D.C. They marched through the nation's capital to show their support for civil rights. At the march, Martin Luther King Jr. gave his I Have a Dream speech. The women of the civil rights movement did not get to say what their dreams were. None of them were given much time to speak. Many Black women felt that their voices were being ignored. The civil rights movement could not have happened without women. They were movement organizers, teachers, and writers. They built organizations, studied the country's laws, and trained young activists. They worked passionately to stop racism. The women of the civil rights movement also worked to stop sexism. A society is sexist when women do not have the same rights as men. Even in the background, women made history. All right, this is going to continue on the next page. Barbara Reynolds is a journalist and a minister. There are hundreds of unnamed women who participated in the movement, she said. It was not just a few leaders, such as Martin Luther King, who put their mark on history. It was these women, Reynolds said. The women of the civil rights movement were wise. They knew they needed to take on both racism and sexism. Together, many women wanted to build new political movements free of all forms of discrimination. The courage of Black female activists also inspired other movements. For example, it inspired the feminist movement and the gay rights movement. A social movement is a group of people who work to get more rights. King's wife, Coretta Scott King, was a leader too. She used her talent as a singer to spread her husband's message and raise money for the movement. She also worked to support human rights. Taking leadership. Martin Luther King was the most famous leader of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, SCLC. This was one of the most important civil rights groups of its time, but it was a lifelong activist, Ella Baker, who started the group and set its main goals. Many historians see Baker as the most important woman of the civil rights movement. Barbara Ransby is a historian. Baker operated in a political world that was, in many ways, not fully ready for her, Ransby wrote. She inserted herself into leadership situations where others thought she simply did not belong. A parallel march on independence. The movie Selma showed King's role in the marches that went from Selma to Montgomery, Alabama in 1965. Their goal was to push the government to pass a law. The law would make sure that all Americans could vote, not just white Americans. King was the most famous leader, but one of the march's main organizers was Diane Nash. She was barely shown in the movie. Even when women are remembered, it is not based on who they really are. Take Rosa Parks, for example. She is often seen as an accidental hero. Everyone seems to think she was a frail little woman, Reynolds said. They think she only sat down at the front of the bus because she was tired and her feet hurt. The truth is that Parks was an activist her whole life. What she was tired of was being put in the back of the bus. Another important civil rights leader was Dorothy Height. She stood on the platform with King during the March on Washington. She said many women were furious because they were mistreated during the march. Height wanted others to notice that women face sexism. Along with other Black female leaders, she held a separate march. The women marched down Independence Avenue while the men marched down Pennsylvania Avenue. Black women are going to lead the way. Today, there's a new generation of Black female activists. Political leader Donna Brazile said the nation should be ready for more of them. Black women are taking an active role in beginning what I call the next phase of the Black political movement, she said. Black women are going to lead that way, but we're not going to be alone. We're going to bring as many people with us, because in moving the country forward, we can leave no one behind. Oh, that was good. All right, and you're probably already starting to see how this is progressing from ratifying the 19th Amendment to where women didn't have the right to vote, to where we started to see, okay, women started to earn the right to vote, but there was still inequality in race, right? And now we're starting to see how even in the civil rights movement, where leaders were fighting for all races to get equality or to get rid of some of the inequality, we're still seeing where women maybe aren't recognized to the same level as men. All right, so with that said, I want you to think about this. What is this article about? And why does the author title the article, "The Many Black Women Who Helped to Build the Civil Rights Movement"? Pause this video and think about these two questions. All right, great. So we've read the article. We've started to think about the article. Let's discuss this article. Now, before we get started, I want to remind you, The main idea is the big idea that the author wants you to understand and take away from the text. A supporting detail is information from the text that supports, explains, defines, or proves the main idea. And remember, for the last couple of weeks, we've been talking about that big main idea is kind of that tabletop, right? It's the big idea the author wants you to take away. But those supporting details are the legs of that table that help support the main idea. All right, so here's what I want you to discuss with a family member, a caregiver, or a friend. First question, what is another title the author could have given this article? Pause this video and go ahead and talk. Great. All right. So now you've thought about what is another title the author could have given this article. I want you now to go in and I want you to discuss what evidence from the text supports your thinking. Pause this video and go ahead and talk. Great. All right. You came up with some evidence, some supporting details. Remember, that can be information that explains, defines, proves, supports, right? The main idea. Now I want you to find explicit information in the text that supports your thinking. Now remember, explicit information is what the author put in the text that is explicitly stated. So go in there and find some sentences, some quotes, some details that explicitly support what you said could be the title of this article. All right, pause this video and go ahead and do that. All right, great. All right, so now that you've had this discussion, I do want to tell you, remember how I told you we're still going to work with main idea today, but you might see it questioned or asked in a different way. When an author gives a title to an article, a lot of times the main idea of that whole article is actually captured in that title. So I want you to think about the title that you just discussed that the author could give this article. I now want you to talk about, did that title that you said the author could give this article, does it capture the main idea of the text? Go ahead and pause this video and have that last conversation. All right, great. Now that we've discussed this, we're ready to write. So using that lesson 15 note catcher, record your main idea. Then find 3 supporting details from the text and record them on the note catcher. So in the top of the note catcher, so once again, this looks just like our other day one note, or our other note catchers that are in the first lesson of the week in which we capture that main idea and supporting details. However, it is titled a little, or it's asked a little bit differently in that first row. So it says, what is another title for the text that captures the main idea? So we just talked about this, right? What title could the author have given this text that really captures the main idea? So you're going to record that under that first question. And then you're going to give me 3 details from the text that supports that title that you just gave this text. All right, pause this video and fill in that note catcher. All right, great. Hopefully when you were capturing that title that really helped to, or you wrote that title to capture that main idea, you mentioned something about how Black women were an important part of the civil rights movement, but were sometimes unrecognized. Or it might say something like, even though Black women weren't as recognized as men, they were just as important in the civil rights movement, right? Because this whole article talks about the important Black women in the civil rights movement who maybe weren't as recognized as men, but were just as important. So that idea needs to make sure it's captured in that title. And then you go in the text and capture some of that explicit details that proved it. For example, it talked about, and looking over here at my article, it talked about how in the movie Selma, how Martin Luther King was mainly featured in that movie, but Diane Nash was one of the main organizers who you actually didn't see much in the movie. It didn't talk about her as much, but she was just as important. See how that detail, that section right there, really supports this main idea that women were just as important in the civil rights movement, even if they weren't as recognized. All right, so now that we've done this writing activity, I want you to share your writing with someone and tell them why you chose to write what you did. When you finish that, I want you to complete, after you complete this assignment, I want you to remember to read a book with a family, a caregiver, or a friend for at least 20 minutes. And then after you do that, we're going to do that fluency practice. So using a timer, remember it can be a cell phone timer, a kitchen timer, you can have someone count to 60, read that passage for 1 minute. Count the words that you read and write the number at the top of that text. Now this is your day 1 or your first day of this article. So tomorrow, as you read it again, you're going to notice the more you read it, the faster you get. Okay, so don't forget to do that fluency practice. All right, I really enjoyed my time with you, and I'm super excited about the concepts and the ideas that we've really developed over these past couple weeks, and the more work we're going to get to do. So tomorrow, we're going to dive back in this article, and we're going to do a close reading activity with it. All right, see you tomorrow.